Welcome to the Remarkable Retail Podcast, Season 8, Episode 16, presented by Salonis. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm Steve Dennis.
Our special guest on this episode is the one and only Billy May, CEO of Brooklinen, recorded live from the Bamboozer podcast studio at Shop Talk in Las Vegas. If we sound different, we're together in person in Austin right now on our Texas book launch, barbecue, and retail tour. So great to be here after a super busy week with the virtual launch of Leaders Leap on Monday, in-person book launch at SMU in Dallas on Wednesday. So, Steve, the books are now available. I see they're in the wild, and they're already shipping in Canada. Actually, Indigo's already shipping them. So,
Yep.
How's it going? Like, everything's flying out the door?
It's going pretty great. Actually,
Yeah.
even though the hardcover release is a bit later in most markets outside of the U.S., the Audible version and the Kindle version are available pretty much everywhere.
Fantastic.
So look for that. But things are going great. Debuted at number one on a couple of categories on Amazon, and just keep going. It's been a busy week.
Now, the virtual launch, you've uploaded that video, so if folks missed that, they can also see that. Where would they? We'll put a link in the show notes so they can watch that if they.
Link in the show notes. It's on LinkedIn, so people can track it down.
I'm really impressed with some of the great retail in Dallas and here in Austin. On the grocery side, I went finally into H-E-B, Central Market, and the Whole Foods flagship store. On the way here, the famous Buc-ee's. That was quite an experience. Yes. On the way to Austin. And here, we went into the Yeti flagship store, which was quite a brand articulation, customized mugs, a full bar, live stage, and then a treat in Lockhart, mill-scale cult barbecue equipment manufacturer that just opened a really fabulous retail concept store. What did you think of that store?
Oh, I love it. It's super interesting. I mean, it's very niche. That is a definite example of very special and probably never very big, to use something I've talked about. But yeah, I think in the last, what is it now, about 12 or 13 days, I have been in more stores in more countries and cities than I have been in a really long time because I was visiting stores in Paris.
Right.
Seeing the Sephora Champs-Élysées store and the JD Sports new flagship and what Louis Vuitton is about to spring on the world in Paris in a couple months.
Yeah,
so it's as well as Battersea Station in London. So yeah, a lot of retail to see.
If it's Friday, it must be Austin. I think it is for you and swimming around in your head. What did you think of the WRC, the World Retail Congress?
Oh, it was pretty interesting. You know, I've as some people who have talked to me about this, I don't know if I've said this so much on the podcast. I have a love-hate relationship with most conferences because there's quite a lot of things I think that are very interesting, and it's good to hear leaders share their vision and so forth. But there's also a lot of sharing of the obvious, I think, or the yes, we've known that for 10 years. Glad you finally figured that out. So I would say WRC was no better nor worse than that in any regard, and it was good to catch up with a few friends as well. And it was Paris,
right?
There were croissants,
and we had several guests on the podcast before WRC, so we'll put the link in the show notes because we had some great interviews. So we're sitting right now in a hotel in this huge Simon property, the Domain. They describe it as high-density office, retail, and residential center, Northwest Austin. It described as Austin's second downtown. Now, it's not new. I think it opened up really early because you were involved in some of it with Neiman Marcus, right?
Opened 17, 18 years ago. Yeah,
so, but it's really on the make. It's quite an impressive place. It's massive. We're in a hotel. I saw several hotels. Quite impressive, right?
Well, the thing I think that's interesting about it, because 99% of the people listening probably have no context for this whatsoever, but I think it's indicative of a trend we've seen in retail, which is the streetscape retail. A lot of the tenants that would have been the key draw in a regional mall are here. And and it's mixed use. So I think as we think about the direction that retail's been heading in for a while, it's away from malls, away from big anchors, and the best specialty stores are really in places like this, or streetscapes like South Congress in Austin, if people know that.
Right on. All right, well, let's get to the news. Good segue, actually. Physical retail, still not dead. What's going on? We do have a couple of bankruptcies to report on, though.
Yeah, well, there are a couple of things that are in the news. The bigger one that most people wouldn't know about would be Express, as we talked about, I guess, a couple of times. Looked like they were going to file for bankruptcy, and they, in fact, did. They're going to be closing about 100 stores, so we will see if that allows them to successfully escape. The other one, which is a little bit much more of a niche, because it's not only a U.S. only story, it's also pretty regional, is the very fast growing grocery store, kind of new convenience store, Foxtrot, which a lot of, speaking of conferences, some of their leadership has been a fixture at conferences for the last 2 or 3 years as a hot growing brand. Well, they very shockingly announced that they were closing, like they closed or they announced
tomorrow. We're closing tomorrow.
And then we're done. Yeah. So and they somehow, despite having only 30 stores, burned through $180 million, which I can't quite get the math to work on that. So that was kind of bizarre. I think there's probably more to the story that we'll hear about that. But the main thing here is I just saw that UBS, the investment bank or research firm, predicted that 45,000 stores will close in this next wave of e-commerce. And first of all,
what is this next wave they speak of?
Well, it seems to be tied largely to Temu and Shein.
Okay.
But first of all, I will just say that UBS and several other firms, I think we were talking about this the other day, Green Street Advisors, I mean, many of these firms have almost been 100% wrong about all their estimates. Yeah. So let's just say I'm very skeptical of these estimates, but 45,000 stores in the next 5 years would be a much greater pace than any 5-year period in the history of retail.
Yeah.
And it's not clear to me what would really drive that. Not to say that there won't be thousands of store closings, as we talked about in some of my predictions. Sure. The collapse of the unremarkable middle continues. Yep. The clothing industry is definitely struggling. We'll certainly see several hundred department stores. I shouldn't say certainly, but I would expect several hundred department stores will close in the next 5 years.
But tens of thousands.
Yes. So it's pretty hard to work out that number. So I went boldly on social media and said I will take the under on that. But I think this is it's sort of fun with math because they basically try to calculate the percent of e-commerce and then they translate that to stores. But that methodology has been proven to be wildly inaccurate. Yeah, so I'm pretty sure this will be another dumb prediction.
That model's never been really reliable. And of course, they don't talk about all the ones and all the stores that are going to open because we saw about 20 stores just in the midst of opening here and maybe 100 that we've seen. Sure. On this tour.
Yeah. So it's the net number is much more interesting, but their methodology I would say is fundamentally flawed. But anyway, we shall see.
Let's talk about luxury. I mean, we've been calling out luxuries as and we've had folks on the podcast from LVMH, and we've looked at luxury in a whole bunch of different ways, and we seem to be seeing a should I say bifurcation now in luxury results. Talk about what you're seeing.
Well, luxury's been kind of a mixed bag for a bit here. What we've mostly seen is the very, very high end. We used to call it true luxury at Neiman Marcus, which is a little bit of a snooty term as opposed to, say, accessible luxury or affordable luxury, which is a little bit of an oxymoron. But the real standout brand, regardless of what's been going on the last 2-3 years, has been Hermes. They had a great report of earnings. LVMH, which had outpaced, and they, as people will know perhaps from our interview with Anish Malwani, or just generally about LVMH, is they're a mix of very, very high-end and then more accessible luxury. So it's a little bit hard to parse that out. But they have seen some decelerating results. They had really an amazing year last year, so they were comparing against an 18% year-over-year sales increase. They just reported only a 2% sales increase. And then Kering, which is the other big luxury house of brands, I guess you could say, known for many brands, but in particular there's some struggles at their Gucci house. They warned of pretty significant profit drops coming up. But again, they are also a little bit of a mix of very, very high-end and a little bit more accessible. So, the bifurcation, I think, is really the high-end continuing to do well because you're really serving the 0.5% or 1% customer that's not really affected very much by the broader economy. But then as you start to get into the more merely affluent as opposed to super rich, it's very easy to cut back on some of the more extravagant spending if you're worried about inflation or you're worried about just general spending pressures.
And these are big global companies, right? So they could be easily affected by, sales deceleration in a country like China or Brazil or whatever, right?
Yeah, well, both LVMH and Kering pointed to some weakness, continuing weakness in Asia overall, but kind of Japan coming back. So, it's a bit of a mixed picture there as well.
So the FTC, for the second time in as many months, have stepped in and filed to stop a merger. They a couple of months ago stepped in with the Kroger and Albertsons, and now they're stepping in with Tapestry and Capri. So what do you make of this?
Well, this has gotten actually quite a lot of chatter on social media because, well, first of all, it looked like this merger was going through. This was kind of late in the game, I think, relative to when, because it's been announced quite a while ago now. So it's a bit of a surprise. But also, I think a lot of people just don't believe the logic here that the FCC says that the reason they would stop it is because it limits competition, that by putting Tapestry and Capri, which have these accessible luxury brands, Michael Kors, Kate Spade, et cetera, that would be very limiting. The argument against that is that there are plenty of other companies. But, I mean, I'm of two minds about it. I think if you are there are several brands that are very much direct competitors. Putting them together, you could argue, does put some a little bit more power on the part of the manufacturers. More consolidation. But anyway, I guess we'll ultimately see where this will go. But it's a controversial move for sure. And again, comes a little bit late because this deal, I think, was pretty much closed or closing.
Speaking of data, we didn't start off at the top, but let's finish up with some economic news. I mean, it seems to be becoming murkier, right? You know, I'm here listening to the news as we drive around. I am looking for an opportunity to say the word David Pecker while I'm on microphone.
I don't think that ties to the story, but yes, we hear it a lot about Mr. Pecker.
Mr. Pecker and porn stars. What a world we live in. But let's talk about the economy.
Well, yeah, maybe it's even becoming more stormy. I don't know. Yeah. The news, at least in the U.S., it just does be, it's a bit more confusing. We talk about soft landing, talk about interest rates decreases. Now, inflation looked like inflation was coming down as fast as it had gone up. Well, now it's another month where we're getting some indications that it looks to be quite sticky. The U.S. GDP growth, which had been, easily leading the rest of the world, dropped by almost half to about 1.6%, which was also a surprise that it was that low. So, and then we've seen at least record for over a decade, credit card delinquencies. So that, suggests a little bit more strain on the consumer. So, yeah, I think it's just a little bit unclear. This actually, what's interesting to me is we've heard, as we've talked about a bunch of times in the recent earnings announcements, most companies saying, yeah, we had a pretty good last quarter, but we expect the rest of the year to be tougher. But then you'd see, unemployment stays low and consumer spending is still high and consumer confidence is good. And you kind of go like, well, what things look like there's pretty good momentum, but everybody's signaling some concern. Well, I think this is the first set of reports that's come out in the last, really month that starts to make it look like, things might definitely be slowing down, and we might not get the interest rate decreases quite as fast, quite as deep as people were expecting.
Interesting. All right, let's leave the news there. And just before we get to our interview live in the Bamboozer podcast studio a couple of weeks ago with Billy May, let's hear from our presenting sponsor, Celonis. Want to ramp up speed and productivity for your entire retail operation? In the Celonis Process Mining for Dummies Handbook, we show you how Celonis process mining technology, enhanced with process intelligent AI, can help you streamline performance across your entire retail business so you can drive lasting value from end to end. That means purchasing, supply chain, omni-channel execution, merchandising, and customer service processes, all managed and optimized through one powerful software solution. To get your free copy of Process Mining for Dummies and see how it's generated millions in value for brands around the world like Aldi, Globus, and Edeka, head to Celonis.com/remarkable retail. Billy May, welcome. We are in the Bamboozer podcast studio here. Welcome. I think you and I and the three of us were last together on a stage, and I believe you were handing us a bit of hardware.
I was
at
indeed
that point.
An award that I had no involvement in other than handing it to you.
Well, we do appreciate that part.
Totally running away from any accountability. But yeah, we just thought we'd talk about that for the next 25 minutes.
Absolutely.
Very good.
Top podcast from an influential standpoint.
Top voice of retail or retail voice. So anyways, much appreciated. It's great to see you again. Thanks for joining us on the pod. We've been really looking forward to that. So,
first-time caller, long-time listener.
Love it. Well, let's start by telling the folks, the listeners, who you are and what you do for a living and how you got to be you.
I'm Billy May. I'm the CEO of Brooklinen. We're a direct-to-consumer. We'll talk about that later. We're a home essentials brand.
Yep.
Founded 10 years ago, husband and wife. Saw an opportunity in the market and built an incredible business.
And you've had quite the career. I mean, you've got an esteemed journey through e-commerce, retail, digital, and retail. Tell us a little bit about that. Esteemed.
I don't. That likely means old and gray hair. And I'll take that at this point. Yeah. I mean, the way I describe it is I'm a fourth generation retailer. Started my career as a merchant. My family owned and operated a men's specialty business, which my great-grandfather started. My grandfather scaled. My father contracted and ultimately retired, closed it down after 100 years. So I grew up in the business.
Yeah. And is that like right from, I wouldn't say infancy, but right around the kitchen table, did you always want to be in business and always want to be in retail and follow in, just excited by the conversations in the house?
Very much so, yeah. My father made it a point of always being home for dinner, so he would close the store, lock it up, and literally come home for dinner.
Wow.
And I started working there, when I was 12 years old. First doing odd jobs, then stocking, and then selling, and eventually I had an open to buy when I was in my teens. He let me buy some sportswear, and so I cut my teeth.
So other teenagers get like a Camaro. You got an open to buy.
I got an open to buy, yes. It wasn't an open checkbook, I assure you. But yeah, and it was great. I've been fortunate to spend some time and gain experience on some incredible merchants throughout my career. My father, as a independent operator and retailer, I always put him up with any of the people that I've had the good fortune of crossing paths with. He was an incredible merchant, operator, customer-focused, built generations of business. People, whose grandfather and father and then their son and et cetera. So, I have a certain appreciation for businesses that put the customer at the center and truly practice what they preach from a service standpoint.
Yeah, that's excellent. So we want to come back to your what's going on with this newish gig of yours, but since we have you here and you've got all this great experience, maybe you could just talk a little bit about how, particularly in these different roles you've had over the past couple decades, what's your view of how retail's evolved, how the shopping experience has changed? Talk about putting the customer at the center of things. That seems like a good idea for a long time, but what does that mean today? How's that different in your view?
Yeah, I think that, and I started my career as a traditional merchant, starting in what was the May Company executive training program. And you were taught to run a business and run an open to buy. And, it was very kind of product focused and business focused. And as an industry, it was very store-centric. And as a retailer, you really weren't focused on driving traffic to the mall or to the location. It was driving people into your store.
Right.
And your product and assortment and how you kind of went to market. And I got bitten by the digital bug, 20-plus years ago, and recognized that you could have a direct relationship with the consumer. You didn't have to have a
arm's length or whatever you want to call it.
It didn't need to be through a landlord, or it was your storefront, but you could have a direct relationship. And most importantly, you got a scorecard every day. So you could come in and read your business day to day, and increasingly during the day, what's working, what's not, hour to hour. So you didn't have to wait until your weekly reports came out to see how your business was performing. And that's something that I was always interested in and fascinated, and I liked the idea that it was a performance-oriented business. And so I think a lot of companies, for a long time, the digital side of the business was kind of the island of misfit toys. You kind of took pieces and parts and moved them over there, and you stick that under the CMO, which because it's a brand, sits under the marketing function. It's a commercial operation, and I think for a lot of organizations, they were late to the game because they failed to recognize that you're building an extension of your business to connect with your target consumer. And so I was fortunate to build some direct businesses within larger organizations, whether it was building the global digital function at Adidas Group across their portfolio of brands, or Abercrombie & Fitch, where I was for 6.5 years in building their digital and marketing and corporate development functions. And so I've seen, the industry develop and grow from digital kind of being this adjunct part of the business to now, it's core, but you'll hear about data and how people are using data to improve their operation, et cetera. At its core, what I find is that most digital operators start with the customer and work backwards. Instead of starting with the product or the store or the experience, working forwards. And so, in the
it's a little bit of their heritage as direct marketers or direct response marketers, right? Is kind of the genesis of that thinking, I think.
100%. Testing is core to the old, direct marketing mantras.
Yep.
Steve knows well. And so I think that notion of it's less about what, I know the customer wants, and let's offer customer choice. Let's read, react, and then respond. And being able to read customer preference, react to customer preference, develop an experience that's customer-focused instead of what you believe a layout should be or how you're reading it. And so as you embed that further back into your organization, you start listening to the customer, you start embedding that back into product development. When you start embedding that back into kind of the core of the operation, then your business suddenly becomes a more modern operation, and you don't kind of have this separate entity or function, i.e., digital. And so I think that companies talk a lot about putting the customer at the center, and that's at the core. And it's and we can talk about it later. It's a little like the term omnichannel. It means something different for different people. Direct to consumer, it's got different connotations depending upon the business. But in essence, if you are listening to the customer, if you are responding to the customer, and then you're tailoring your offering towards the customer, I mean, that to me is truly putting the customer at the center. Now, that doesn't always mean adjusting your brand to meet the customer. You have to have a point of view.
Sure.
And so I think that's an important element around where the guardrails are as a company and who your target customer is.
So maybe just a follow-on question about that, and maybe this is a whole separate episode, but don't you think if you were paying attention to customer behavior at all, most organizations would have brought digital and physical together much more quickly?
Yes.
And why do you, well, I'm preaching to the choir here probably, but and why?
Amen.
But fundamentally why, I mean, this is not trying to make it a history lesson, I guess, at this point, but I'm still amused when I come to these conferences as much as I love them, and I hear somebody talking about it, and I was like, yeah, that was in my board presentation in 2005.
Right.
Like, this isn't like, or just to say, here's our new strategy, we're going to be very customer focused. I'm like, what were you doing the last 100 years?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
But that was a little bit of a tell for maybe where I heard that. Well, anyway, I guess, do you have any theory as to why that happened? But what is the takeaway from that as you think about responding to change? Not so much to go back historically, since we don't have a time machine as far as I can tell.
And it's almost asking what stops it from happening is also really...
From a leadership standpoint. There's always new things, and there's always things that are good ideas, yet having the awareness of it is not the same as accepting a reality and taking action, right? So I'm just curious, given your roles, what gets in the way of making that change and responding to disruption?
I think to some degree, organizations and corporate culture gets in the way. I think organizational silos kind of get in the way. Like, this is digital, and so this is this function, and it's not in this function. So, and then the pendulum swung the other way, and then you were creating digital leadership jobs, but they were designed to eliminate their job in 2 to 3 years. Like, why?
Right.
If all they're doing is doing someone else's job, then why don't you just? So, I think that plays a part of it. I think it's oftentimes hard if you didn't grow up in digital or grow up with a more kind of a direct response approach. It's hard for you to understand like how to do it.
Right.
And so as a result, you end up creating a functional organization because, hey, boards are asking for it, so we build the business. Right. And then when you have to integrate it back in, what I have seen when you integrate it back into the cores of the business, and it's just if you're running planning, you have digital planning. If you're running merchandising, you have digital merchandising instead of separate groups or functions. I think one of the challenges is how do you continue to push from an innovation standpoint, because you don't have a leader who's kind of leading and driving some of those functions. And I think that one thing that as an industry we have done is pivoted this function into IT. And so now you have chief digital and technology officers who are responsible for digital. And look, IT in most organizations is a cost center, and they're evaluated based on cost metrics. Yeah. And it's hard if you're trying to drive growth or drive transformation or drive innovation in improving the customer experience and other things if you're a cost center. And so I do think that is a mismatch in the current and broader marketplace, that if you're a CEO, if you're an executive, it's something that has to reside on your plate. Like, you have to champion that. You can't pass that off within your organization. You have to play an active role. And I think that, this is selfish of me, but I think that generationally within the broader marketplace, we're seeing kind of the ascendancy of digital leaders into more senior roles, whereas historically you had to be a merchant or you had to be a store operator. And so now you're seeing more digitally oriented executives rise to those positions, and as a result, they're thinking about the business more holistically and thinking about, how do you invest in and how do you innovate your brand or the experience or your product, et cetera, with an eye towards the customer and how you measure that. And I do think that that's a subtle change, but it's one that I certainly welcome, and I think that as an industry we should absolutely embrace.
I'm just reflecting on the things you're talking about and your experience and philosophies, basically, and an operating experience. What you could have had, you probably had a lot of choice, or you could have a lot of choice in going all kinds of different directions. What was it about Brooklinen that attracted you to the opportunity? I mean, there's a kind of a set of, it's a great opportunity, there's great people, and then, okay, there's a bunch of that stuff, I'm sure. But what is it about them and where they live and the category that got you really excited? Because you've been in a bunch of different categories, right? So what got you interested in the home category, in that genre? I'd
been a CEO previously in the home space, specifically in the kind of premium kitchen space,
yep.
And had some experience and exposure outside of traditional, I'll call it, apparel retail, and recognized the power of brand in the broader kind of home space, and how to develop a brand and how to differentiate your brand relative to the market. So when I looked at the space, it's really interesting. There's research that suggests that the people tend to think of their bedroom last when they think of rooms in their home. Kitchen is certainly a critical component, which is where we saw a lot of investment,
sure.
But they don't tend to spend a lot of time thinking about their bedroom. In fact, when you have people over, you kind of close the door to your bedroom.
That's where the coats go.
That's coats go on the bed. It's a good example. Yeah. And so when you ask people, what shoes they're wearing, an average person can probably tell you what shoes they're wearing.
Sure.
It's branded. If you ask them what sheets they're sleeping on or what towels they probably have no idea. So that to me is an opportunity from a brand standpoint. And Brooklinen was started 10 years ago. Interestingly, there are a couple of brands in the space that were all founded within 2 months of each other.
Everybody had these same ideas.
They're all same ideas, incredible. Same entrepreneurs kind of thinking about ideas and opportunities. We were founded by a husband and wife. It was originally a Kickstarter program where they had come to Las Vegas, interestingly, had stayed in a hotel, loved the sheets and the bath towels and the linens, and that they went down to the shop to buy them, and were shocked when they looked at the sticker price and said, "Wow, like has to be an opportunity to find hotel quality at better value." And that's how the original Kickstarter, which was oversubscribed and by 10x, and the business was kind of off and running. And so it has a unique positioning kind of in the marketplace. It has a unique point of view. It has a unique brand personality, which I think that most people think of their bedroom or their bath in very utilitarian terms, and we use things like smart and clever or playful, and there's a bit of personality around the brand. We think that life can be colorful and should be, and we think that that's one of the things that differentiates our offering. There's a certain kind of attitude and playfulness around the brand that I think is appealing and differentiating. Candidly, the way the business was built. It was built with profit in mind from the original start and founding of the business. It was managed with an eye towards profitability. Novel concept.
For some of our listeners that may not be familiar with this concept when it comes to digitally native vertical brands, I don't know if you like that moniker.
We can come up with any number of them, yes.
We will give Andy his 25 cents for saying it. But yeah, what is... Is that part of what you think sets yourself apart? Because one of the questions was going to be, home fashions, bedding, et cetera, obviously a hugely competitive category in general.
Yes.
But we won't say their names, but there are a couple of other players in the space. What is the difference that you believe is going to make you guys successful over the long term?
Yeah, I think that, I think our offering and product and price positioning differentiate our offering relative to the market. I think the way the business was built, it was built very smartly with an eye towards investment in return, not throw a lot of money to acquire a customer or throw a lot of money, to build a brand and hope that in times, the funny joke is, we make 90 cents on every dollar. How do you make money? Volume. So that was never core to the brand and how it was built. And it's, when you talk profit, like we're not talking a synthetic, calculation. The business was designed and built profitably in the way...
You don't have community adjusted EBITDA.
We do not have community. That's a good one. That's a good one. No, I'll have to go back and talk to our CFO about it now. And so I think that, look, our customers, we have an incredible retention rate for customers that once they try Brooklinen, they tend to, almost 3/4 of them tend to make a second purchase. And then of those, half of those make a third purchase. And then once you get past that, they tend to be raving brand fanatics. So, part of it is getting them into the brand and acquiring them at unit economics that make sense.
There's another phrase we don't hear often. Unit economics.
Interesting. I'm obviously gonna have to Google things after we get done. I know we're a little bit short on time, but can you just talk briefly about the role of stores in your growth? But also, and I guess this is a bit of a loaded question, I have a general sense, not specific to your business, that we obviously went through this period of so-called disruptor brands. We don't need no stinking stores. Then it was like, it turns out we really need stores. And now we've got Allbirds closing a bunch of stores, Outdoor Voices closing a bunch of stores. I don't think Casper's getting to 800 stores. And some of these numbers that have been thrown out. How do you see that? I mean, you obviously understand the economics and the symbiosis between online, offline, et cetera. So just generally, what's your view of kind of stores and the role of digitally native vertical brands or analog native vertical brands for that part? But specifically, what are you thinking about with Brooklinen?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you think of a digitally native brand or a DTC brand or any of the other pieces, it's just like a specialty retailer. And stores play a critical role, especially in our category where a customer wants to come in. They want to touch and feel. They want to find fabric. The store has to serve a purpose, separate and distinct, but complementary to the digital experience. And in our category, if you're looking for a sheet set of the same color or the same pattern or the same fabrication, great. Like we can do that. If you're looking for you want to mix and match patterns. You want to mix and match fabrics. You want to put together a bedding look, or you want to experiment, or you want to trial a different fabric. It's harder to do online on how, that's merchandising.
Discovery is just generally harder online.
Absolutely.
Right?
And look, the average consumer has a hard time putting them together. The same way
Sure.
A J. Crew or an Abercrombie or any of the URBN brands, all of which I've had the good fortune of spending time at or serving within, they're great at merchandising, on how to put things together for the end consumer. And in many respects, it's a superpower for them.
Sure.
And so we see stores as a way to, yes, drive discovery, but also how to put things together. Our associates are a critical component of that. There's, not this channel conflict that we used to talk about 10 years ago and who gets what. Not important. It's really, how and why do stores exist? What's the right format for the store, whether it's a large or small, and in a market, how do we reach consumers? I think a lot of direct brands open stores because they viewed it as a cheaper way to acquire customers than spending digital dollars. And I think over time you realize you actually acquire less of them, and then it was like, oh, it's a great retention vehicle and a branding vehicle. So you're kind of backing into
Right. We've got a board meeting coming up. What did we say
last year? Let's say something different.
Let's
this
build
year.
on that. Let's build on that.
Let's build it.
Retention is the new rent or something.
Yeah.
Right.
Retention is a
So
new thing.
I'm a believer. I would also say that as you think about the customer and you think about the go-to-market strategy, and this is something, I'm sure Steve will appreciate, because Steve coined the term harmonized retail, and that's I'm a big believer in harmonized, and partially because it was kind of a way to build an integrated operating model, right? Instead of using the term omnichannel.
Right.
But I think that, and I've certainly learned. I'm a student of the industry. The term omnichannel has evolved, and it when you think omni's everywhere. So when you think an omnichannel strategy, it's not just online and in store. There's an element of wholesale and how you reach consumers, and that's wrapping your brand around the consumer in an omni way. And so stores are a critical component. Partner retailers can be a critical component. Digital partner retailers can be a critical component. It really starts with the customer and work backwards. How and where do they want to shop, and how do you reach them as a brand? And so, we're early in that journey and thinking about our go-to-market strategy. We do not wholesale our core brand, Brooklinen, and we have a sub-brand called Marlowe, which is a less expensive kind of utility brand that was launched 3 years ago. And we've used that as a way for us to learn in wholesale. We have an agreement with Walmart. We're in 1,200 stores. It's great learning. They're actually a great partner with us. So it's a great learning experience for us in figuring out how to go to market in a different way. We have an existing business with Amazon. So, unlike a lot of people, yes, it's profitable for us in the way we reach consumers. So you
keep saying that word,
profitable, I know.
Interesting.
It keeps coming up. Last couple of questions, and we're here at Shop Talk, and I think we got you just after you rolled off the stage. In addition to, is there anything in addition that kind of knowledge you were dropping in addition, or anything you'd like to add that you were sharing with the folks here?
Keeping the theme here, one of the questions was, growth versus profit and how to balance the two.
Yes.
And last year, the focus was very much on, bottom line profitability and pulling back. And I don't think it's binary. I don't think it's either or. You can have profitable growth. You can have profitless prosperity, as Steve has been known.
He's been paying attention.
I guess a long-time listener.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
But I also think that means, making some hard decisions, thinking about more creative solutions, and testing and learning in a different way, as opposed to, we've used this playbook. It's the same playbook that works, so we're going to continue while your costs continue to escalate. And so I think that is interesting. There's a lot of testing. There was a lot of conversation within the conference about, kind of SKU expansion, then SKU rationalization, and now we're seeing back to kind of SKU expansion again, testing into some of those markets. It's interesting in terms of how retailers and brands have gotten more control over their inventory, and now they're willing to, I think, take a little more chance, focus on innovation and product with the customer at the center, and how you're solving problems for the end consumer. We're certainly testing and taking a cautious approach, but thinking about our assortment and thinking about product and how we can better connect with the consumer and differentiate our offering. But I think that it's interesting because the conversation is less about, what do you do on digital and what do you do in stores. It's really like, where do you focus on the customer?
I was going to say, what are you doing for the customer, right?
Yeah. And how do you
it's
test
interesting because you've been coming to Shop Talk for a bunch of years, and these narrative threads kind of appear pretty actually early in, right? And as you said, it's very interesting listening to how you're perceiving that.
Yeah. Well, Billy, we're delighted that you were able to join us and drop some knowledge, and we're looking forward to what's next for Brooklinen. But thanks for joining us. And if people want to learn more, obviously Brooklinen has a website and a few stores at this point. And but if they want to learn about you in particular, you're a LinkedIn person, or how?
I'm a LinkedIn person, active. I was actually I just met with somebody that I connected on LinkedIn in 2003.
Wow.
I was shocked when I pulled that up that it was that it had been that long ago. But I'm an active participant in the community, and I have I know one of the themes for this year is on the podcast is around leadership transformation, and I encourage everyone to ABC, as I call it, always be curious, and being a student of retail, getting into the market. Observing consumer behavior, spending time online, looking at ancillary categories, always be curious.
Yeah, I love that. Well, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you guys for having me. I really enjoyed it.
I really enjoyed our conversation with Billy. I've known Billy for many, many years. We actually shared the stage with him early in January when he was part of the awards, and it just sparked in our minds, hey, we haven't had Billy May on the podcast, and he's had such a rich background, and he's now leading Brooklinen, and so it really was a treat to get him on the mic.
He may be the only person that we've had on the pod that has exactly this background, that he started in e-commerce in the late 90s, early 2000s. So somebody who was at the very, very, both you and I have been on that. But as far as guests, who has that perspective, who's worked at several different brands in different capacities. So that rich background of channel experience, of digital versus analog, physical versus e-commerce kind of experience, I think is really interesting because he's lived it, he's seen the evolution, he understands some of the tension and some of the nonsense that goes on. So hearing him sort through that, and then I also feel like we're getting more and more people like Billy running these disruptor brands. It's kind of like the adults are starting to take over from the not that there aren't some great founders that have been able to be quite successful, but I think we're starting to see as part of this shift, I guess, to the next phase of these brands where professional managers with deep experience are coming in. So very interesting category, interesting brand that he's there, and he's just got great experience. So I'm very curious to see how that all goes, particularly with their store expansion.
Well, we were in person with Billy May. We're in person now, and we'll be again in person pretty soon, actually. We'll be together in Barcelona at Shop Talk Europe. We'll talk more about that on episodes coming up. But for now, let's leave it there. Thanks for tuning in. New episodes of Season 8 presented by Celonis will show up every Tuesday, so be sure to tell your friends and colleagues in the retail industry all about us.
I'm Steve Dennis, author of the best-selling book Remarkable Retail, and my new forthcoming book, Leaders Leap, Transforming Your Company at the Speed of Disruption. You can learn more about me, my consulting, and keynote speaking at StephenPDennis.com.
I'm Michael LeBlanc, consumer retail growth consultant, keynote speaker, and a host of a series of retail trade podcasts, including this one. You can learn more about me on LinkedIn. Steve's new book, Leaders Leap, is available today from your favorite bookseller in the United States and releasing a bit later in some global markets. Safe travels, everyone.